was a Sunday, early in the morning. I live in the suburbs, but my parents own a farm that I enjoy going to because I get to see my dog. Her name's Molly. She's a mutt, but she's not a tiny dog by any means. At that time, I felt very safe around her and would often take her for walks in the forest that was nearby. The day started off like any other. Me and my dad got in the car, drove around for a while, and arrived at the farm. I immediately got out of the car and hugged Molly. My parents always got angry when I hugged her, since I'd smell like her for the rest of the day. I put her leash on and asked my dad if I could take her out for a walk. He always thought that we would just go down the road and back, but I always found it more interesting to take her into the forest. I always felt a certain kind of peace and relaxation there. It was unmatched by anything else. So, we took a turn and headed to the forest. Usually when we got there, I'd take her leash off so she could explore on her own. Most of the time I'd carve my name into the trees or look for anything interesting. I was playing baseball with some rocks and a wooden leg, presumably from an old table, and that's when I heard it. Molly was barking at something. This wasn't usual when we were in the forest. I thought it was a fox or some other animal, so I quickly grabbed the wooden leg like a weapon. I knew that if it was a fox I wouldn't attack it, but I had a sense of security while I was holding it. I called out, "Molly, Molly," but she just kept barking. This was very strange for me, since she always came to me when I called. I followed the sound of her barks and stumbled across a scene that I'll never forget. There was a man, probably in his late 50s, half naked, carrying a large machete in one hand and holding moonshine in the other. This was the first time that I stumbled across someone in the woods, let alone someone half naked and carrying a big-ass machete. He was completely ignoring Molly and hacking away at the ground for some reason. I didn't really know how to handle the situation. Even now I have no idea how I would handle it. "Sir, are you okay?" I asked in confusion. I don't think I understood the seriousness of the situation at the time. He turned around, revealing his face. He had some of the clearest blue eyes that I had ever seen to this day. I could see them so well because they were open wide. "Come here, boy. Look what I've dug up." I was afraid that if I didn't listen to him, he would start chasing after me, and that was something I wanted to avoid at all costs. I got closer but kept a good distance. I didn't see anything, except for an empty hole. He returned to hitting the ground with his machete, occasionally taking sips from the bottle. I used this window of time to get my dog, and started walking away slowly, so as not to notify him that I was leaving. But then I took one final glance at the man. His head was dug deep in the hole. I was intrigued, so I kept looking. I know, how stupid. He finally got up from the ground. I was shocked when I saw him carrying a bone in his mouth. I have no idea what animal it belonged to, if it even did belong to an animal. I had seen enough and started sprinting with my dog. As we ran, I heard him laughing, and then I saw something flying from the corner of my eye. It was a damn machete. I heard him yell, "Damn it!" This made me run even faster. I know the forest very well, so I wasn't afraid of getting lost. I ripped through the branches and bushes until I got out of that forest, but I didn't stop sprinting until I arrived at the garage, where my father was testing out lights on our tractor. I didn't tell him a single thing about the man, since I was afraid he'd get angry and wouldn't allow me to walk Molly anymore. I never went to that forest alone ever again. So, the man with the machete and the bone in his mouth, let's not meet. I want to start by saying that this isn't the first bad experience I've had while dog sitting, but it's definitely the worst. So, I started dog sitting back when I was 13 and made good money doing it. For the record, I'm currently 19 and this happened when I was 18. I set up an easy way for people to contact me about dog sitting. I put posts on Facebook and Instagram about it often, and would get people messaging me asking me to dog sit. I got a notification from Instagram one day for a message request. I accepted it, and the message said that my wife and I are looking to find a dog sitter while we go away for a week to Florida. You will have to work from the 4th to the 11th of this month. We'll pay you $300 for the week, and you're welcome to stay at our house or go back to your own home. I started messaging back and forth with this man. We're going to call him Mr. Brown for the sake of privacy. So, I agreed to take on the job and told him I would stay at his house for the week. Once I got to his house, I was introduced to his two dogs, Mina and Letty. Mina was a little Yorkie, and Letty was a blue hound. I was shown around his house, which was surrounded by 76 acres. I live in a farm town and live on 32 acres myself, so staying here didn't really freak me out. The closest neighbours were pretty far away, and you would actually have to drive down there if you wanted to talk to them. They told me the rules and when to feed them, blah blah blah. Then Mrs. Brown told me about the nearest neighbour. In her words, she was a real nice person, just a little drugged up and confused. She mentioned how sometimes she would pull up into their driveway instead of her own, and would end up mistaking Mrs. Brown for her dead daughter. Hearing this made me feel pretty bad for her, and I know all too well how hard it is for parents to lose their child because of how my parents were after losing my brother in a car accident. Mrs. Brown said she shouldn't do anything bad though, and if she came up to the house, just point her back home and she should leave with no problems. After they left, I was down to watch movies and just chill with the dogs. The first 2 days were fine with no hiccups. The third day, however, the old woman, who I'll call Mrs. Rose, did pull into the driveway. I came outside as she was getting out of her car. She looked up to see me and immediately she got back in her car and left. I chalked it up to her realizing it was the wrong house when she saw me and went back inside. Later that night though, I got a call from Mrs. Brown asking if I was okay. I said yes and asked why. She then went on to tell me about how she got a call from Miss Rose and that she said there was a robber at their house. I explained what happened and she just laughed and said she must have been confused and forgot that they were out of town. I ended the phone call making a note to go over there tomorrow to clear the air about me being a robber. Once I went to bed that night though, things got crazy. I woke up around 2, hearing a light scratching sound that almost sounded like ticking coming from outside the window. At first I thought it might have been a bird or some sort of creature and left it alone, but the noise kept me from falling back asleep. I wanted to scare it away, so I got up and went to open the blinds, but screamed when I lifted the blinds and saw Mrs. Rose trying to pry the window open with a pair of pliers. Once she saw me though, she started banging on the window with the pliers. The dogs started barking now, and I quickly got up, told the dogs to follow me, grabbed my phone, and ran into a room with no windows, which was the bathroom, locking the door in case she got in. I called 911 and explained the situation quickly, giving them the address from what I could remember. She said that the police would be there in 10 minutes, which is pretty good considering the house is in a rural area. And I had gotten the dogs to be quiet and put them in the closet connected to the bathroom to make sure she didn't hear them. I was trying to stay calm, and I could still hear the pounding on the window. As I continued to talk to the operator, I then heard the glass shatter. I cursed under my breath, trying not to cry. I was really scared and pretty much ready to cry from the fear of being beaten to death by someone who is clearly not in the right state of mind. I was whispering what was happening to the operator, hiding in the back of the bathroom in the tub. After about 4 minutes of pretty much silence, I heard footsteps, and I could see feet under the other side of the door, and I cursed to myself again. I then saw Miss Rose get on her hands and knees, looking under the crack, and I mistakenly let out a gasp. She gets up, quickly pounding at the door, and I can tell she's still using the pliers. I am at this point crying, asking the operator how far away the police are, to which she responds 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes felt like forever. I screamed at Mrs. Rose to please go away, and she screamed back that I shouldn't be here. Then, I heard the sound of police cars, and about a minute later, I heard them trying to kick the door down, and I felt a little better. I was told to stay on the line until the intruder was caught, and that the police were trying to get into the house. Eventually, they did get into the house, and I yelled to get their attention. Not that they needed it. She was still banging on the door. Once they got into the room, she was told to drop her weapon, and she obeyed, saying she didn't do anything wrong. They got her in cuffs, and a police officer told me that it was okay to unlock the door, to which I slowly got up and unlocked the door. After being taken to the police station and giving them my story for their report, I went to my parents' house because I was just too scared to be alone there. The next day I called Mrs. Brown and explained the situation. I got full payment even after telling them I wasn't going back to the house. They called me a few days later, saying that Mrs. Rose was under the influence of drugs, and in her words, she told the police she decided to take care of the robber, aka me, herself, and that she did nothing wrong. She was charged with breaking and entering, which is kind of ironic. After that I quit dog sitting, and I'm a lot more paranoid and always make sure my doors and windows are locked. So, Mrs. Rose, let's not meet again. So, I've been going through these posts, and some of them brought back a very disturbing memory that I had locked away, but it's been several years, 12 years to be exact. I decided that it was time to share it with all of you. I haven't spoken of this story in a long time. I was 9 years old, and my family had adopted a dog named Piper. Piper, we were sure, was a border collie mix with Chinese Chow because of her bright orange colour. We picked her up from the pound just before she was supposed to be put down for being too aggressive. They told us she had been abused for almost her entire life, but when we brought her home, it wasn't long before she became comfortable with me and my siblings. She warmed up to us rather quickly, but she followed me everywhere. One beautiful evening, I was scootering around my driveway, going back and forth from street to backyard. Piper was sitting by the gate, panting happily as I would circle around to her and give her some attention before going back out. I was wearing my favourite blue shirt and some jean overalls that my mother had gotten for me. Now, this was a pretty safe neighbourhood to begin with, full of old people and younger kids. Not a whole lot happened on the daily. A white minivan had turned onto my street and began to slow down as it got to my house. This made me a little nervous, but I tried to brush it off. Being a bright blonde, blue-eyed child, I was used to being pointed out and stared at, but I became a bit more concerned when they did it another 3 times. I was just about to turn and head back to my backyard when I heard someone call out. I turned and there was the van, the side door open, and now what I recognise as a military-looking white man crouched down so that he was eye level with me while still in the van. A Hispanic man was in the driver's seat. "Hey there," he said. I stared at him and said a soft hello. My parents told me to never go with strangers, but I wanted to be polite. "What's your name?" he asked. I hesitated, but I told him. He smiled and then asked, "How old are you?" I told him, 8, a lie. So pretty for such a young girl. This made me blush, but not in a good way. I glanced back at Piper. She was now standing very still, watching the guy. He then asked, "I lost my big black dog. Have you seen him?" Now in my area, people would ask for help finding the dog pretty often, and it was true just about every time. The guy wasn't in a big white van like in the movies, so I began to think through my day to see if I remembered seeing a dog. Suddenly, I felt my body jerk towards and into the van, crashing to the floor. I realized that his arms were around my tiny waist and his large hand over my mouth. I remember his hands feeling like metal, and it scared me. I began thrashing, and before the guy even had the time to reach for the door, because I was putting up a fight, Piper was in the van with us, biting down and ripping into the guy's arm. I remember the sound of tearing clothes and flesh. It gives me goosebumps to this day. When my chance came, I don't even remember getting out of the van, but when I felt my feet hit the ground, I bolted for the gate with Piper at my heels. I heard the van speed off as I ran straight into my house, slammed the door and broke down. I was a small, sobbing, shaking mess as my mother quickly came to see what the problem was. I told her everything to the best of my ability through the sobbing. My mother began to panic and called my father, who was home in 15 minutes. He circled the block and went some streets down, trying to see if he could find that van, but with no such luck. We called the police and filed a report. The officer told me that I was a brave young girl for having fought like that, so my dog had time to react. The officer told my parents they would have a patrol car come down the street a bit more often for a couple of weeks, just to make sure he doesn't come back. That night, I noticed a bit of the man's blood had gotten onto my blue shirt. Put the shirt down and buried my face into Piper, she having been on my bed with me for the rest of the night. The blood brought it back to my mind, and I was about to start crying when Piper sniffed my head, gave a soft lick, and I laid down, letting out a huge sigh. My heartbeat began to slow down, and I relaxed. I felt safe. I showed my parents the blood and they gave my shirt to the police. I'm not sure if they ever found him. I never saw those men or that van ever again. I'm still thankful to this day for my dog. She's long since passed away, but I will forever remember her as my guardian dog.